I also know that it's an opportunity for me to inspire people with type 1 to show that they can do anything that they set their minds to, and that anybody in the medical system who has told you that you have to live a reduced life is just wrong.
Welcome back to Curiosity Class, the podcast where we break down complex topics into easy to understand ideas and bite-sized pieces. My name is Jeff Album, and I've been a curious person my entire life. Inspired by Albert Einstein's quote, "If you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it well enough," we aim to make learning accessible and engaging. On this show, we're going to bring you experts from various fields, ranging from personal finance to physics, to help you understand everything from 401ks to how airplanes fly. So let's dive in and satisfy our curiosity together. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Curiosity Class, and I'm joined today by none other than the one, the only, the Jesse Lavine, like a fine wine. What's going on, man?
Hey, Jeff. I'm happy to be here.
Thanks so much for coming on, man. I super appreciate it. So, it's been a long time since we've gotten together, so that was the first reason I was excited. But second, I know you as a friend, as a badass cyclist. You have a very interesting story about cycling across the country that I'm sure we'll get into. But I'm excited to kind of dive in today and get your story and get your background and all that jazz.
Awesome. Cool. Let's go.
Where do you want to start? You want to start at the beginning? Is that a good place to start?
Sure. The beginning of my life, of time.
Yeah, all the above.
Curious about the beginning of the world, but yeah. we can de-scope that.
If you know anything about it, please share. Please share. So kind of, what's your background and kind of where does your story begin as a young lad?
Yes, I was born in Houston, Texas, to a family of 5. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 11. So in a lot of ways, that is sort of my origin story, and a lot of things that I have rejected about myself and also embraced about myself that has caused me to take this life path that I've taken. And yeah, diabetes was, I guess that was sort of the topic that we were going to discuss today, was my experience with type 1. So that's why I don't normally introduce myself as, "Hi, I'm Jesse, I have type 1 diabetes." But hi, I'm Jesse, I have type 1 diabetes.
And so for those of us who are, less knowledgeable on the subject, type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, can you break down kind of the difference between the two?
Yeah, that's a great starting point. So type 1 is an autoimmune condition where your pancreas stops producing insulin, insulin is a crucial hormone for your body to break down glucose, which is the energy that we intake from food. And then our cells break that down and use it to energize all of their multiple processes. And so without insulin, glucose is just floating around the cells, and the result is high blood sugar, which results in fatigue. And the worst case scenario is a coma or ketoacidosis. That's different from the keto diet. But yeah, the main point is that it's an autoimmune condition, and we don't really know what the onset is. There are multiple theories that if you have a virus as a kid, your immune system will attack your beta cells, which are the insulin producing cells, mistakenly, and then all of a sudden you have no way to produce insulin anymore. And then type 2 diabetes is where your body still produces insulin, but your body has produced so much of it that you are resistant to it. So this is typically a lifestyle-based condition, and the way that our society functions right now, where or for a long time with highly processed foods and incredibly stressful environments and lack of sleep and sugar in everything, it drives our insulin production system to its limits. And our bodies are unable to, even though there is insulin in our cells to allow glucose into them to break them down, it's extremely less effective. So therein lies the difference, is that type 1, you don't produce any insulin at all, and you have to take it exogenously via a syringe or an insulin pump. Type 2, you still produce insulin, but your body doesn't use it correctly. And at certain points, in extreme cases, people also still have to take insulin as well.
And so if you have type 2, what do you do? How do you make your body, how do you break down glucose?
So the best thing to do, as recent research is saying, is that you should limit the amount of glucose that you're taking so that you can allow the system to sort of de-inflame, if that makes sense.
Got it.
So because the insulin is a direct response to glucose in the system. And so if you reduce the amount of glucose in the system and you feed your body with whole unprocessed foods, you're allowing your body to rehabilitate the insulin production system, and so that your body can become more sensitive to insulin over time. So the goal with type 2 diabetes is to increase insulin sensitivity.
Because your body has become insulin resistant. So there's
right.
Okay. Got it.
Exactly.
Got it. And you said you were diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when you were 11. What was what were the signs beforehand? Like, were you feeling fatigued? Were you, because a 10-year-old kid can be complaining about a lot of things, but you don't necessarily think about, I'm just curious what that looked like.
Yeah, the warning signs for type 1 diabetes are commonly mistaken for flu or just so the flu, the cold, just general fatigue. I was experiencing a lot of weight loss. I was peeing all the time. I was drinking water all the time. I remember one time I woke up and I chugged 2 liters of water in under 5 minutes from my parents' refrigerator that they had in their room. And I went to bed. I went back to bed. This was like 2 a.m. And I peed my bed. And at that point, my mom had been slowly watching the signs of me just being tired and like sickly feeling, and just a low energy output for what an 11-year-old kid should be.
Yeah.
And so eventually she took me into the doctor's office and I got my blood sugar tested, and my blood sugar was in the 500s, which, to set the context, the normal range for someone without diabetes is 80 to 100, 120. So like you shouldn't go anywhere above 140 even after a meal for someone without diabetes. And mine was in the 500s. So that is order of magnitude higher. And then from that point on, I started taking insulin, and my whole life changed right before my eyes.
And what do you remember the first time you had insulin? What do you remember feeling? Like, what were the immediate effects?
Well, that first year I grew 11 inches. I think that my body was just completely starved from nutrients from not being able to process any of the foods that I was eating correctly. So that was cool, but it also hurt later on.
Sure.
I remember insulin being extremely hard to figure out. It's a very tricky drug because you have to perfectly titrate it with the amount of carbs that you're eating. So when I was first diagnosed, I remember this very clearly. The first meal that I had was a McDonald's spicy chicken sandwich in the hospital bed. And they told me, I was like, can I be eating this? And they told me that you could have whatever you want to eat as long as you take insulin for it, which is true. But I have learned later in my life through experimenting with all the diets under the sun that is not the best way to manage diabetes. So I was eating enormous amounts of carbs. They recommended that I eat 90 grams of carbs per meal, which is, let me give you, okay, so a slice of bread, a typical slice of bread is like 22 to 26 grams of carbs.
Okay.
So yeah, that's 4 slices of bread for an 11-year-old kid. And I could just eat that and be hitting my carb quota.
And why did they, what was the rationale? Like, why did they say that you should be having so many carbs with each meal?
I don't know that I can speak to the guideline justifications, but that is the current school of thought, and was back then too, that if you're going to take insulin, you also need to take carbs, which, as I've experimented with all the diets that I have, it actually is hard to really wrap my head around that as making sense, because if like you don't actually need to intake sugar for your body to function properly. There isn't like an essential glucose. There are essential amino acids and there are essential fatty acids. And this is like a very simplified version of the science. And I'm not the person to go into detail of it, but you can survive without intaking glucose. And so, I don't really know. I don't have a good answer for you, except to say that insulin is a very expensive drug, and it's type 1 diabetes is a very captive market. And so
sure,
it's sort
do
of
with that what you will.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So, and I will say that, like, even without taking carbs or like taking insulin for meals, like you still do need to take insulin for the rest of your daily functions. There is a baseline level of insulin that is required for living.
Got it. And so, this is maybe a silly question, but this is the podcast where we ask a lot of silly questions like third graders. So there actually is no such thing as a silly question. So type 1 diabetes, you don't produce any insulin naturally, but you don't have the same insulin resistance that type 2 diabetes has, correct? So when you take it, what's the word, exogenously? Like from the outside?
Exogenously. Yeah, from the outside of the body.
When you take it exogenously, your body knows what to do with it. So it just can't make it, but it knows what to do with it to actually break down the glucose. Is that true?
Right. It's true. And the exogenous insulin acts at a different rate that endogenous, meaning produced in the body, it acts.
Got it. Okay. So you find out when you're 11 years old that you have type 1 diabetes. You start taking insulin. You grow almost a foot in a year, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And I think most people would probably take that and be like, man, this sucks. This is awful. I can't do anything. But you did the opposite. So you decided, go for it.
Go ahead.
No, go for it.
No, that is how I took it at first. It totally sucked, and I was extremely angry, and I was a nuisance to be around for the first 2 years of my diagnosis. And I took it all out on my mom, who was my primary caretaker at the time, and just stubborn, mean, and angry 11-year-old, 12-year-old, 13-year-old. And then there was one experience where my brother came home to visit me from college, and he observed the dynamics in the household. And he sat me down and had a brotherly chat. And he said, dude, you have to stop being such a dick to mom. She's just trying to help you. And that was a moment that I remember everything changing for me in terms of my perspective on it. So I had always been trying to like learn the ropes and take control of my diabetes early on and give myself injections and test my own blood sugar and that sort of thing. But it wasn't until then that I took more extreme ownership over it. And yeah, I wanted to just be a normal kid. So there was a lot of resentment towards having to live with this thing and having to do things differently than all of my friends were doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How did that kind of manifest? Because I mean, that's a lot for an 11-year-old, and it's a big realization for a 13-year-old to have, saying, "Man, I got to take ownership." So what did that look like?
Yeah, it just meant like practically it means giving myself all of my own diabetes management decisions and actions. So if I'm eating food, I'm counting my carbs. I am calculating how much my blood sugar is currently from the blood sugar that I want to be at. And I am giving myself insulin for all of those things. I'm also carrying sugar around with me all the time in case of emergencies. And I'm also taking backup supplies with me in case my pump or any of my devices stop working. So there's a lot of things that, like, my parents still drove me around. I didn't like start to drive when I was 13, but I was as much in the driver's seat as they would allow me to be comfortably, and then the ownership level increased as I continued to grow up. And then, yeah, in college, I was like ready to be out in the world and do things. Um, and then in my sophomore year, I decided to take a semester off because my blood sugars were always just super high, and I was falling asleep in all of my classes. It was much harder to balance diabetes management when you're also a freshman and sophomore in college and wanting to have fun in the new independent lifestyle that you have.
For sure. For sure. So you took a semester off to kind of get back into the swing of things and try to manage it better?
Yeah. And that was the first time that I put on what's called a continuous glucose monitor. It's commonly known as a CGM.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a device that goes on your upper arm or abdomen, and it goes under the skin. You insert it by yourself. You don't have to go to the doctor to do it. And that reads your blood sugar every 5 minutes. So for comparison, before that, I was testing my blood sugar via a finger stick every 10 times a day. So those were I was getting high fidelity data from the CGM comparatively to those 10 times a day snapshots of what my blood sugars are.
And when did you start using a CGM? Sophomore year?
As soon as I took that semester off, the intention was to get my diabetes back under control.
Okay.
And learn how to manage it in this new paradigm of being an adult or a young adult.
And how did you hear about CGMs, or what got you into that? Were you doing research on your own? Did someone recommend them?
No, I actually had a CGM the first time I went to college, freshman year, but they are, when your blood sugar goes out of range, they beep at you. There's an alarm that is mandated to be there because it's a medical device.
Sure.
And so it's not a perfect technology. So if you sleep on it weird and you put too much pressure on it, or you put it in the wrong location, or your phone or your receiver is too far away from the actual device, then it will just go haywire and let you know that something is wrong. So I wore it the first night of college. First time that I ever slept in the same room as my roommate. And I was like, oh gosh, I don't want to be that kid. I don't want to be defined by this. Because that was my ethos up until from basically 12 to that point, where I was like, yeah, I just want to be a normal kid. I just want to do things normally. And so I did everything under the table. Every time I would check my blood sugar, it was very discreet. Every time I give myself a shot of insulin, it was very discreet. I would hide my pump tubing, and all the symptoms that I was having in terms of low blood sugars and high blood sugars, I would just power through and take what I needed when I did it. But I would try to not stop. I would try to not stop as much as possible.
Dude, that seems on top of everything else that you're going through of life and whatever, it's just a huge, crazy, just a lot of extras.
Yeah, it is.
If you're comfortable, I'd love to learn kind of just some of the details. Like you've mentioned pump, you've mentioned tubes. Can you walk us through kind of what are some of the devices that you use?
Sure. So an insulin pump is a mechanical device, and it has a reservoir, which is a fancy word for a tube that you fill with things. And you fill that tube with insulin. And then there's a longer, skinnier tube that goes from the pump, which is, it looks like a pager. People have come up to me and said, what are you doing in the 2000s with the pager? And I say, hey man, it's my insulin pump.
Do they feel like real jerks?
No, some of my friends do it still just for fun, just to poke at me. So, and then it's connected to your body via what's called an infusion set. So the infusion set is generally it's the size of a quarter, and the pump tubing can connect and disconnect to this port. The infusion set is the port, and that is also underneath the skin with a small um, like when you're fishing, the feel of fishing line is basically what is under your skin, but it's hollow. So insulin can travel through it and into that spot. And then for a long time, like my progression with technology was like I used needles and syringes at first, and I drew my insulin from a vial. And then I started using insulin pens, which are, they look like a pen, but you put a needle onto it as opposed to it being already connected. Okay. And then you can like twist the back of it. So the plunger depresses at a set amount.
Okay.
And gives you how much insulin you have prescribed it to give you. And then the insulin pump. Yeah.
And this is all based on how much you're eating at a time. So you need to, so as you're eating a meal, you need to calculate how many carbs is in this meal approximately versus what is my blood sugar currently at to know how much insulin to give yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So those are the main factors. And then the CGM is also a newer addition. It's been in development since like 2000, maybe like late 1990s. But it's gotten to the point where now the CGM connects to the insulin pump, and there's an algorithm inside of the insulin pump that will receive a new glucose value every 5 minutes and then determine whether it needs to continue giving you insulin or give you more insulin if your blood sugar is going high, or give you less insulin if your blood sugar is going low. So it's sort of, it's referred to as a closed loop system. It's not quite a closed loop system because you still have to take glucose if your blood sugar is low. Okay. That would be a true closed loop system, but it's like, it makes diabetes management a hell of a lot easier.
So this is another dumb question. If you can have an insulin pump, can you also not have a glucose pump? Like something that has like sugar water, basically, right? Like that you could then plug into the continuous glucose monitor to say, hey, either stop pumping insulin or pump a little bit of sugar water. Like, would that not be helpful?
So I think that the limiting factor there is how long that glucose solution will be good for before it expires. So that, and also I think it's just much more challenging to like dose that
around. Sure.
Yeah, I always carry sugar with me. I either have a banana in my pocket or like gels that bikers and runners use as like a quick solution if my blood sugar is going low. But the thing that the insulin pump does, like the main calculations it does, are what's called correction factor, which is what your current blood sugar is compared to what you want your blood sugar to be, which is your target blood sugar. And then you have your correction factor is basically a ratio of like how many units of insulin will bring you down by how many points. So for example, if my target blood sugar is 100 and my correction factor is a 1 to 50, 1 unit of insulin to 50 milligrams per deciliter of glucose, I am over my target, and my current blood sugar is sitting at 200, I would take 2 units. And then if I'm also eating a meal, I would have an insulin to carb ratio. So if I'm having one of those slices of bread that we talked about earlier with 22 grams of carbs, and my insulin to carb ratio is 1 to 10, so 1 unit of insulin to every 10 grams of carbs, I would take 2.2 units of insulin for that piece of bread, in addition to the amount of glucose that I am over my target value. So that total bolus for that moment would be 4.4 units.
And so that's what the pump is doing automatically?
You still have to program, like you give it, like there's like standard inputs, like you tell it where your blood sugar is and you tell it how many carbs, but you can tell the pump pre-programmed, like these are my ratios.
Wow. And what are your ratios based off of?
Size, height, weight, how active you are, time of day, how well slept you are.
Got it. So this is individual
factors. Yeah, it's individual.
Got it.
There's like a standard calculation that's a good starting point, but then like to really fine tune it, it's all trial and error.
Got it. So you're constantly, I mean, probably you have it dialed in now, but up until you got it to where it was really tuned in, you were just playing with it.
Yeah, and I still have to dial it in every day because depending on what my output levels are and how hot it is outside, like my insulin will impact me differently.
Wow, dude, that's crazy.
Yeah. So like today I rode my bike to my office and it's a 7.5 mile bike ride and it's hot in Austin. So instead of taking the normal full dose of insulin for like a 30-gram meal, I would take half of the insulin and let the other 15 grams counteract the exercise and how much the exercise is lowering my blood sugar.
Wow. And do these calculations are they second nature to you by this point?
Yeah, at this point they are.
Okay. So you're like,
but I always realize when I'm describing it, it's like, what would you say?
Well, it's amazing that you're able, because I mean, you must be able to look at a plate of food and be like, okay, this is about what I think I'll need, right?
Mm-hmm.
Man. And so did this kind of all start to come together, the continuous glucose monitor, these other factors, after you took that semester off of college?
Yeah. So at that point, I was just bringing CGM and then doing manual injections. And then like a couple of years later, I started wearing a pump. That's when it fully integrated for me.
Got it. Okay. And we alluded to it at the beginning of the episode, but you have done some pretty amazing athletic feats. I would love to learn more about those and hear kind of the impetus for that story.
Yeah. So the one that you're referring to is the bike ride across the country, which I did with 20 people all living with type 1 diabetes after I graduated college. This was in 2017. And the impetus was after that sophomore year, when I first put on a CGM, my experience ordering the CGM and going through all the insurance rigmaroles was so frustrating. And I took a step back from that phone call after being on the phone for what felt like hours. And I was like, if it's this challenging for someone who is privileged, middle class, like has good insurance on my parents at the time, to get the necessary technology and devices in order to live like as healthfully as possible, then I can't even imagine what it's like for someone who does not have that privilege and access to resources. Mm-hmm. And so that put me on a trajectory where I was like hell bent on making diabetes easier and more accessible and more approachable for everyone who has it. And so I started getting involved with a bunch of nonprofits, and I worked to found a chapter of the College Diabetes Network at the school I went to in Claremont, California. And there were three big nonprofits at the time. There's the American Diabetes Association, the JDRF, which stands for the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, which recently changed their name a couple weeks ago, and I can't remember what they changed it to. And then there's Beyond Type 1. And of those three, Beyond Type 1 was definitely the coolest and the hippest. It was founded by Nick Jonas, among four other people, Sam Talbot, who was on Iron Chef or Top Chef, I think Iron Chef, Sarah Lucas, whose daughter, Mary, was diagnosed with type 1 at an early age, and then Juliette Debog, I don't know how to pronounce her last name. I'm really sorry for listening to this. And I went to visit their offices in Menlo Park, California, and was just like, how do we do this thing? Like, how do we make this condition easier for people around the world? And they were doing some really cool stuff at the time, and a lot of like awareness and advocacy towards like what are the signs to look for when someone's diagnosed, so that you know to go get them tested for type 1 diabetes. And then around the time when I was graduating college, Mary, who was an employee at the time, I don't remember what her role was, but we had become friends in my visit there. She emailed me and she was like, hey, we're going to do this bike ride across the country with 20 people living with type 1 diabetes. Do you know anybody who would want to do it? And I said, yeah, I do. And I had only ridden my bike around campus really ever, but I knew that I could do it. I was like, yeah, I know that this is possible. And I also know that it's an opportunity for me to inspire people with type 1 to show that they can do anything that they set their minds to, and that anybody in the medical system who has told you that you have to live a reduced life is just wrong. And so we did it. We after college, we biked from New York City to San Francisco, and it was incredibly challenging the entire way, but we made our way there gradually over 70 days. And we made a documentary about it that you can find on YouTube. It's called Bike Beyond. And yeah, we did an amazing team and amazing sponsors and an amazing director and producer of the documentary. And I love and miss all those people. And that like really sort of got my hunger going for like crazy athletic achievements.
So that was the first one. That was the impetus to everything.
Yeah. That was
Most
it.
people start with a 5K, maybe a good mile time. You're like, no, I just bike across the country.
Yeah, I don't have a good tapering strategy. Just go for it.
Dude, you can't just gloss over that. So you started in New York City. You biked for 70 days. Like,
Mhm.
do you have any rest days? What was the like? Walk me through that a little bit.
So the schedule. So we had 2 vans with us, and one of them carried all of our bikes, all of our luggage, and then the other one carried all of our diabetes supplies.
Okay.
And so there was one van that went like from one stop to the next stop, and like set up camp for us wherever we were camping. And we stayed at like such a variety of places. It was like church, like on the floors at churches, on like high school gym floors, people's backyards, national parks, you name it, like motels, all of the above. And people were so incredibly generous. In every place we had a place to sleep, rest our heads peacefully, and we had a place to shower and wipe off the grime from our 60 to 100-mile ride for the day. And the way that it worked was like a couple of people on the team volunteered to take a couple of weeks stints at a time and like make the logistics happen for those things. And yeah, so all of us took turns driving the vans, and then everyone who was not driving was riding, and we would ride for like a week straight at a time before you would have a rotation. And then like every, I think like 8 or 9 days, we would take a rest day. And those rest days would often coincide with a neighborhood party. So we had, I think, it was like New York, Cleveland, Nashville, Denver, Napa Valley, and San Francisco. We had parties, and like part party, part fundraiser, part like come meet everyone, and like we're just gonna hang out. And it was like those are the coolest parts, because people with diabetes from like a 4-hour radius around those places driving would come and see us. And like the coolest part about the ride was when we would meet young kids who were newly diagnosed in like a range of areas, like ranging from like highly accessible medical attention to like extremely rural and desolate. They would come around and see us, like all 20 adults tattooed in these diabetes devices and pumps and beeping and just like doing it. Like we were a force to be reckoned with. And they would come to those events being very scared and timid and resentful about their diabetes. And we would meet them, and we would talk to them, and we would hear their stories, and they would ask us questions. And then we would get texts from them the next day or like weeks following that said like, hey, I just want to let you know how big of an impact you had on my kid. Before they met you, they didn't want anything to do with their diabetes, and now they are begging to do all of the math and give themselves their own injections and test their own blood sugar. And every single time I talk about that, I get chills, because like that's the reason we did it. It's like to inspire people to show them that they can live beyond their diabetes. And I think that's also applicable to like any chronic condition. Like obviously everyone has their own like, the thing that diabetes has taught me is that everyone has something. It's like empathy is a superpower of mine, because I know like how hard my life has been when I've been walking through the normal like classrooms, job interviews, whatever, with high blood sugars and just feeling like crap, and knowing that like the person across from you could also be having a horrible day. And um and I think that like it's just cool, like whatever like bracket insert condition you have, like you can do more than you think you can do.
That's so cool, man. That's so cool. I was getting chills when you were telling me about that. So the point of the ride was a fundraiser, an awareness event, to bring an advocacy event. And so, were you able to track like how much money was raised, and did it go to the charity that put it on, or the foundation that put it
So
on?
we raised like $750,000
Holy
across the whole
smokes.
summer, which was amazing. And some of it went towards all, like the expenses that we had to do as a bike ride, but then
For sure.
most of them went towards organizations who were working towards bettering people's lives with type 1.
Dude, that's incredible.
Yeah, it was really cool. It was the experience of a lifetime.
And do you still keep in touch with any of the 19 other riders?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, some of them are. I know that even if I don't talk to them all the time, that they're going to be lifelong friends.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. And so it sounds like that. Well, okay. So how do I want to phrase this? It sounds like you've always been interested in some sort of metabolic health, but then there's been like this continuous, I'm going to learn how to do the injections myself. I'm going to learn how to do the math by myself. I'm going to get involved. I'm going to do these athletic feats. And so how does that bring us to the work that you currently do, which is unbelievably fascinating?
Yeah. So the company, I work at a company right now called Levels, and Levels is a software tool that takes information from continuous glucose monitors and shows people how food affects their health. And so it is a metabolic health tracker. We have glucose. So glucose is the only molecule that we can track in real time via CGMs. And then there are other labs that we can take that are like high leverage towards our health. And so we combine all that data and give someone a picture of how their health is doing. And the clearest image right now is glucose, like glucose correlated with food and exercise and sleep. And the cool thing about this is that it's all preventative. So like these devices that we use, our continuous glucose monitors, have typically been only acquirable by a prescription. You have to get a doctor to write you a script for these. You have to take it to a pharmacy, and then you have to get it filled, and you have to pay out of pocket, or your insurance may or may not cover it. And the founder of Levels was noticing that his energy levels were decreasing from where he thought he should be at a healthy 27-year-old. And his doctor was not agreeable in terms of giving him a CGM to track it. And so he would do a finger stick like 50 times a day and track it himself. And then he was finally able to get his hands on a CGM and realize that he was actually at pre-diabetic, like almost a type 2 diabetic glucose levels. And he was a super healthy guy. And realized that this information needed to be accessible to everyone. And so our platform is actually specifically for people who do not have diabetes, that you can work on increasing your energy and your focus and preventing disease in the future. And I think this is so cool. And it's like so perfectly aligned with my personal mission, because when I put a CGM on for the first time when I was 19 years old, I was able to see the real-time impact that food had on my glucose levels. And I'm going to harken back to something I said at the beginning, which was when I was first diagnosed, my doctors were telling me to eat 90 grams of carbs per meal. And when I put a CGM on and I ate 90 grams per meal, my blood sugar would not come down from 300, 250 for the next 3 or 4 hours. And then by the time it did come down, I would go extremely low to like below 80 into like the 50s and 40s. And then you eat sugar again to bring it up, and then it takes you back across the normal threshold that you want to be. And so it's just this roller coaster that you're constantly riding, and you can see it in real time with these glucose monitors because you get 288 data points a day. So it's a movie of your glucose in high definition. And that was incredibly powerful for me because I was able to try all these different diets that I had been reading about. I went vegan for 6 months. I went keto for many years. And I've done a lot of things in between. And I've realized that most of the things that my doctors were telling me when I was a kid were wrong. And I don't think it was malicious, but it's just like these guidelines that doctors like spew advice from are like founded on like incomplete research and sort of bad ideals. And I don't think that like the doctor's advice like were giving me malicious advice. I think it's just like, their standard protocol. They have like only a couple of minutes to spend with each patient before they have to move on to the next person. And so seeing that for myself, the extreme case of someone who doesn't produce any insulin at all and I have to give it to myself, I've also been paying close attention to people around me who don't have diabetes. And so having meals with someone who doesn't have diabetes and eats a bagel or a pancake or a cheeseburger or like a Thanksgiving dinner and feels tired and fatigued, and they're like, oh, I'm sorry, like I gotta go take a nap, or like I just like I have all this brain fog from this meal. And like I just had a hunch for a long time that these people's glucose were spiking. And now that we can put CGMs on these people who don't have diabetes, it's like, okay, cool. Yeah, now it is. Like now we can see that it is spiking with actual data. Mm-hmm. And as opposed to going to the doctor once a year where you get a blood test and they tell you you're fine. You go back the next year, you're fine. You go back the next year, you're fine. And then all of a sudden they tell you, hey, you have diabetes. It's like the reason that those tests are not good is because it's just a snapshot in time. It's the same thing when I was managing my diabetes with just 10 finger sticks a day. It's like going from that to like, okay, cool, my blood sugar is 100 at this moment in time. But then 30 minutes from now or an hour from now, it could be a wildly different number. And I would never have known that without this monitor that I wear all the time now.
And so does it literally do you open, is there like an app? What's the interface? How do you actually see?
So Levels has an app, and so we intake data from multiple sources, and all the data is yours at the end of the day, whether or not you remain a member or you only do it for a little bit. And the app that, so there's a couple of different apps right now, and we're working towards like consolidating them. But the Dexcom device that I wear on my arm, or the Abbott Libre device that is the other company that we use, they both have their own native apps for the CGMs. And then that just gives you like a basic graph readout. And then we pull in that data from an API into our app. And then we correlate those glucose numbers with food logs and exercise logs and sleep logs.
Got it. And again, probably elementary question, but when you're saying your blood sugar is spiking or it's going up super high and down super low, is that when you get the tired feeling? Like, should it, in the perfect world, should it stay, no pun intended, level?
Yeah. So those are the times when you feel tired and insert bracket symptom. It's not, I don't think it's the case where like our blood sugars in a perfect world with perfect food would be completely level all the time. There are natural rhythms to it. Like when you wake up, there's what's called the dawn phenomenon, where your body is saying, okay, cool, I'm awake and I'm ready to start the day. And here's a bunch of glucose to go do all the stuff you need to do. and your liver just dumps it. Or like when you're doing a really high intensity workout and you're lifting a 100-pound barbell, and normally like that much energy isn't flowing through your arms to do that. But when you're doing multiple reps, your liver is like, okay, here's glucose, go do that thing, go do more reps. And so that like is sort of a natural rise and fall to your glucose, but it's much softer than a spike would be from the standard American diet would give you, or a glass of orange juice or a pancake or whatever.
Got it. And so the idea is to try to minimize those large, and, when we say spikes, what are we, in terms of numbers, you said traditionally you want to stay, was it 100 was a good target?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if you're
80, 100.
And so would a spike, let's say, you're sitting at, let's say 90 and you have a pancake, and everyone's going to be different, but what would be a reasonable expectation to say that could spike to 150, 200? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, it's totally dependent on your individual biology. There's a study that came out of Israel a while ago that basically showed like two people can have equal and opposite responses to a banana or a cookie. It's like it doesn't really matter what it is. It's like some people can metabolize these things without any problem, and some people are totally challenged to do that.
That's so crazy, and it's so cool that this exists. Because I feel like it's so like, I think I told you, but I recently found out I have celiacs. So, taking away gluten has been, I actually haven't felt that different, but I've always wondered, like, I wonder what's happening in my body when I eat gluten. And like to be able to see what that would look like in real time is amazing.
Yeah. I would also be very curious about the gluten response to your body.
So would that, but that's obviously different than glucose, right? Like that's a totally different response, or no?
Yeah, but I mean, it's possible that when you eat foods with gluten, they make your blood sugar rise and then stay there for longer, just because your body is like sort of inflamed from that response. Mm-hmm. But I really have no idea. Like that's just a theory.
Got it.
It isn't until you like wear a device and have your own personalized data that we would be able to actually know that for sure.
Right. Oh, dude, that's so cool. That's so cool. I know you said currently right now glucose is you have the clearest picture of glucose. Can you speak to like what your kind of the vision is for the future? Like, what do you want to be measuring? What are the things you can measure continuously? Like, for a layman.
Yeah. So things that you can measure continuously are like heart rate and body temperature. There was a press release a while ago from Abbott that they have a ketone monitor and an alcohol monitor, and I forget, I think it was a lactate monitor as well. And those are amazing because they're other forms of continuous molecular information. And so the future really is this term that we use at Levels is called biological observability. So right now, like if you think about how many sensors your body has, it's like either 0 or 5 if you're counting your senses. And with AI and like, vision goggles, it's more, but we don't have any information of what's happening inside of our bodies. And so like our bodies compared to like a wing of a Boeing airplane, which has like 10,000 sensors, at any point, what's going wrong. Like we don't have that information for our bodies. And so we're sort of flying blind in many respects in terms of the advice that we're giving people about their health from this mass scale recommendation approach. All of our bodies are completely individual, and we have very unique biologies. And so without that information to observe our biology, we can't without measuring it, like we can't observe like what's actually happening.
Right. That just makes so much sense. That's far too logical. You should know what's happening in your body before you make recommendations. No way.
Yeah.
So I know you said you've experimented with a number of different diets, but what does your diet look like today? Kind of, walk me through like a day in the life of what you eat, and then what that typically, again, I know there's a ton of factors depending on sleep and temperature and exercise, but I'm curious like what each thing does to your blood sugar? And then do you have fatigue at all? Let's say you hit everything right. Do you have any fatigue during the day?
Yeah. So for me, the key pillars are good sleep, which I often don't get these days, which I wish I got better sleep. Um, I wear an Oura ring to track that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Exercise. I have to do exercise so that my insulin resistance stays low and I'm sensitive to the insulin that I'm taking exogenously.
Mm-hmm.
And then like a typical day of my food intake would be like fasting until like 10 or 11 or 12. Like basically I can go up until like 2 o'clock without having any food and feel totally fine and just like drink black coffee or water. If I'm doing a heavy workout in the morning, then I'll eat food, but that's typically what I'll do. And then I'll have a lunch, and like I err towards the side towards eating like whole foods, like sheet pan roasted vegetables and like chicken or meat or fish or a big salad, and then I sort of do that again at the end of the day, and then I usually end the day with like a protein shake or peanut butter or like some low carb ice cream. And those are the days when I feel best. Like if I'm like not prepared for the day and I'm sort of just being very reactive to my surroundings and I have to order foods from somewhere and they don't have like healthy ingredients, then those are the days where I'll feel like generally more tired and more impacted by my meals. But if I have my foods and I'm like meal prepping for myself and like eating things that I know are good for me, then my energy levels are generally pretty stable.
And so you don't kind of have that afternoon slump or anything like that?
No, I've sort of have been having it recently, and I'm curious what's going on with like what's different in my lifestyle right now. So I'm paying close attention to my data again, and I'm also adding more exercise. There was like I'm the type of person that like I'm so drawn to the mission at levels that I will sort of like be there at the sacrifice of my own health. And I've done that like with other endeavors in life where I sort of like health has to be the top priority for me, but I'm so good at neglecting my own needs for showing up for other people or other projects. And so that I really have to always constantly remind myself that in order to show up the way that I want to show up, I have to take care of myself.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've been riding my bike to work and that feels awesome. Like the happiest times I've ever had in my life are when I commute by bike and just like being outside and like stacking multiple exercises in one day. I love doing that. And that makes me feel really good.
Mm-hmm. So what will that look like? You said riding your bike, and then will you go to like do a weight session or a run, or what does a stacked day look like?
Yeah. So I started lifting weights again as well. It's like kind of hard to like do logistics for my day when I'm riding my bike, but like the ideal day would be riding my bike to work, riding my bike to the gym, which is like a 2-mile ride, at lunch, doing the weight lifts, riding back, and then riding home. Over the weekend, Saturday, I had a super active day. I played golf in the morning. I played pickleball outside for an hour after that. And then I like walked around outside the Domain in Austin for a while I was shopping for a tuxedo for my sister's wedding. And I was like, I was spent at the end of the day. I was so tired.
And so on days like that, like if you look back at your data, do you just see like it goes up and then just like a steady decline over time?
So the way to keep blood sugar stable over time, to like worry about it as little as possible, is to like first of all titrate the insulin so that I'm not getting too much at one point in time, and then also to eat meals that are like well rounded with proteins and fats, because proteins and fats metabolize very, very slowly compared to carbs.
Got it.
And so if I have those in my system, then I know that I can like do these things like low intensity cardio activities without really worrying about it. And I'm actually wearing a pump right now. This is probably the reason that I'm feeling tired. I'm wearing a pump right now that's wireless. It's called the Omnipod. It's really cool because it's wireless. The pump that I talked about earlier with the tubing, that is it the pump that I just ordered. Again, I'm going back to that pump because it has a better algorithm
Okay.
to like intake the information from the CGM. I went away with it. I went away from it because I was getting caught on all these doorknobs whenever I'd walk through them. I'd just be having a great day or like a good conversation, and I just get caught on a doorknob and yanked back. Just like, what the hell?
Oh
Just
my
like totally takes me out of my element for a second. So I like the Omnipod because it's wireless and I can swim and do whatever without having to worry about a tube connected to me. But
God.
it's also a much weaker algorithm. So like I'm waking up with higher blood sugars than I would like to. And like if my blood sugar goes higher during the day, it's not giving me as much like automatic correction doses that the other one would. And so like my like even though it's like generally pretty stable, it's like higher fluctuations than I would like. And I definitely like as I continually like shrink the range of my glucose excursions, whenever I go outside of that for a week or a day or even an hour, I definitely feel that more. I'm like very sensitive to when my blood sugars
Mm.
are going wrong.
Yeah, you must be so in tune with what is happening inside your body and the way that you feel as it relates to all of the factors that we've talked about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I definitely am very grateful for it. Like, you know, having diabetes is extremely hard, but like, I've been asked the question so many times, like, if there was a cure right now, would you take it? It's like, yeah, I probably would, but also like, I'm so grateful for like the awareness and like care and attention and empathy that diabetes has given me, and also responsibility. It's like I have to like whatever one job I have at levels or like other job that I'm doing, like I always have to be thinking about what my blood sugar is doing in the background. And
Mm.
I can't stop the mental math that's happening. It's always happening in the background. Whenever I look at a piece of food, it's just like turns into a pie chart of macronutrients. And but I'm also like so hyper aware of what I'm putting in my body and what I'm doing to be healthy that I feel like if I didn't have this, I may have gone further down the like the typical path of like diseases that Americans are are being plagued with.
Hmm.
Like if I didn't have type 1 diabetes, it's quite possible that I could have gotten type 2 diabetes later on in life.
Right.
So
Right. Man, if there was, someone who just was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes and you had to give them advice, what would you say to them?
I think I would tell them that it really sucks at first and like just be there with them to like hear their frustrations. Just be like, tell me about it. I think having that when I was first diagnosed, I knew someone else who had diabetes who was older than I was and had lived it, and I saw how okay they were, like seemingly undifferent. And I think that um, like the diagnosis is a promise of a different life, and if you can just show them by example, just by being like a healthy person and just like joking around and making them laugh, then I think it sort of is the right distraction from um, like the life of challenges that they're going to live and knowing that like whatever challenges they're going to face, it's going to be okay.
Mm, it's beautiful. And maybe similarly, or in a slightly different vein, knowing what you know now and kind of looking back, what advice would you give to your younger self, either when you got diagnosed or after or before? Kind of pick a point that you're curious about. But um,
Hmm. I think for myself, I would say that it's not always going to be perfect, and it's okay, and to not be perfect, and to have glucose excursions. Like even when you think you figured it out, and you have a high blood sugar, like there's always tomorrow, and there's
mm,
always like the couple of hours after that. It doesn't have to ruin your entire day, and it doesn't have to define you as a person.
man, I can't think of a better way to end it.
Nice. Yeah.
Jesse,
Thanks for being curious, Jeff.
dude, thank you so much for coming on and giving us a little bit of your story. Where if people want to find out more or get in touch with you or get involved and try levels, is what's the best place for them to do both those things?
Yeah, you can find me on my personal Instagram. It's Jesse_Lavine, JESSE_LAV as in Victor INE. And levels
Lavine,
is
like a fine wine.
levels.com. Yeah, like a fine wine. Levels is LEVELS.com. We have an Instagram presence and all the social media and amazing YouTube content and an amazing blog where you can learn much more detail about all the things that I was talking about. And yeah, if you're curious, I'd recommend trying to sign up for CGM.
Yeah. I mean, one thing we didn't talk about that I'd love to learn more on it is now can you just get them? Can you just get CGMs?
Oh yeah, that was as of last week, CGMs are now available over the counter. So you don't have to have a prescription for it. Dexcom just came out with a device called the Stelo, which is the first FDA approved over the counter CGM device, which is a huge step forward for for this industry and movement. And Levels is working to incorporate them into our app. So yeah, if you're interested in that, you can either get it from Levels or you can go on Dexcom and buy that directly. But I highly recommend the data that you get from Levels. It's much more insightful and educational.
Okay. Well, man, thank you so much for coming on, and I super appreciate you, and super excited to see all the work that you continue to do and keep crushing it.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Jeff.
All right. Bye, everybody.